Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us to learn about Clean Slate. I'm Karen Colson, and I'm a member of Women's Voices Raised for Social Justice. We educate people on important issues, thus this Lunch and Learn, and we advocate for improvements in our communities. Women's Voices Raised has a wonderful upcoming program that I wanted to talk to you about on Thursday, April 13th at 7 p.m. at the center of Clayton. It's entitled Women Mayors Talking: How Gender, Race, and Politics Intersect in Our Communities. The mayors of Webster Groves, Ferguson, and Maplewood, all ladies, will be our speakers. Please go to our website, womensvoicesraised.org, to register. And it's an in-person event, so time to reconnect and to get to know new people, and we really hope to see you there. Well, on to today's program. The Women's Voices Raised Task Force on Criminal Legal Reform and our co-sponsor of this Lunch and Learn, the Jewish Community Relations Council, have been working with Empower Missouri on the Missouri Clean Slate Initiative. We're extremely timely because HB 352 has been scheduled for a hearing on Monday, March 27th, that's this Monday at 4:30 in the House Judiciary Committee. If passed, this bill will automate the expungement process in Missouri. And at the end of this program, we're going to tell you how you can advocate. This is going to be good. So 1 in 3 Missourians have a criminal record. This includes people who were arrested and charged, but then had charges dropped. In 2021, Missouri passed a law to allow expungement or erasure of a criminal record 3 years after someone served their sentence or 1 year after a misdemeanor. The current expungement process is very complex and expensive. And because of this, only 125 people were able to go through this process in 2019. So there's definitely change that's needed. Criminal records are barriers to jobs, to housing, to education, to healthcare, and not just for the person who has the record, but for their families. And of course, that includes children. At least 10 other states have successfully passed similar bills, and some are in the works, like us. So here to talk to us today about Missouri Clean Slate and the impact it would have on lives and communities are Representative Phil Christofanelli and Mr. Jeff Smith. Representative Christofanelli was elected to his first term in 2016 and represents District 104 in St. Charles County. He sponsored HB 352, or Clean Slate, and this would also set up the Missouri Expungement Fund dedicated to the automatic expungement program. Jeff Smith leads the Missouri Workforce Housing Association. He advises organizations that help formerly incarcerated people and consults with organizations involved in criminal justice reform. Just as a point of process, I'd like to ask everyone to please put your questions in the Zoom chat or the live stream chat. At the very end, after both presentations are done, we will have time for questions and answers. So now I'm excited to turn this program over to our speakers. Representative Christofanelli, are you okay to begin?
I'm ready. Okay, hi there, everyone. I'm Phil Christofanelli. As she mentioned, I'm the bill sponsor for House Bill 352, and that is what we have called the Clean Slate Bill. And as was mentioned previously, years ago we passed an expungement process, and that expungement process allowed people who had nonviolent and non-sexual related crimes to, after a certain period, expunge those crimes from their record so that they could more easily reintegrate into the workforce and into the housing market, and with the goal being that once you've served your time and paid your debt to society, that you have an opportunity to reintegrate without a unnecessary mark on your record, so that we can avoid situations where people reoffend. Because I'm sure you all have heard about recidivism rates and how often, after someone has been released from a correctional facility, that they end up committing another offense that lands them back there. And certainly there are a number of reasons for why that happens, but one of the big reasons is that you get out of one of these facilities and you try to find a place to live and you try to find a job, but you don't succeed because a background check is done and they go on CaseNet and they see that you're an offender and they move along to the next applicant, and that is kind of a cyclical problem where now the person is in some dire straits, and it's not entirely surprising that they may resort to criminal activity again. And so certainly we don't want that. I don't think anybody wants that. And from my perspective, we face right now a workforce shortage. I hear from business owners every day that that they are struggling to find people to work, and they really need people to show up to work. We are facing at the same time an increase in criminal activity across the state, and both of those are not good for the state of Missouri. And so we have filed House Bill 352 to make that expungement process much easier. So I will tell you, y'all are getting a look into my law practice here. I'm here in my law office, and I've had clients that have sought expungements, but unfortunately, the work that's involved for an expungement, even of a very minor misdemeanor offense, for an attorney is somewhat substantial. And so for my law firm to take these type of cases, we often have to charge several $1,000s because of the criteria that you have to go through in our expungement statute in order to get one of these done for a client. And the overlap between people that need a expungement so that they can get a job or a house, and the people that have several $1,000s in expendable income to pay lawyers is very narrow. There's not a whole lot of people that can afford to do that. And unfortunately, the legal work becomes an insurmountable barrier to entry for those seeking to access Missouri's expungement statute. And quite frankly, I just don't see any need for this to be so complicated, and that's why we filed House Bill 352. And essentially, what it does is for those people that qualify under Missouri's existing expungement statute. So we're not changing the types of offenses that you can expunge, and we're not changing the circumstances and timelines under which you're allowed to do so. But we're saying for those eligible people, we are going to direct the courts to just do a search through their systems for the people that are qualified, and then on an annual basis, for all those qualified people, the court can issue essentially a omnibus order, an order containing all those records at once, and process them through the expungement process automatically, so that it's not, the burden is not on I guess we'll call them the client or the applicant, but rather the burden is on the judicial system to expunge these records. And I think that's appropriate, because ultimately what we're talking about here is really CaseNet. That is the the main offender. And I don't mean to speak ill of CaseNet, because as an attorney, it's my lifeline. It is the envy of many other states in a judicial tracking system, so that attorneys can file things electronically, and it makes access to justice a lot easier. But one of the unintended consequences of our easy to use and highly accessible CaseNet system is that anybody with an internet can hop on there and Google somebody's name and pull up anything that may have happened to them in their lives for review and evaluation, even if those weren't necessarily meant to be advertised to the public. And so we've created this problem in some sense, and it was really unintentional. And so I think it is our responsibility as a state to clean up the unintended consequences of our advancements in legal technology. And one of those unintended consequences is that almost any employer or housing applicant can hop on there and do their own background check. And unfortunately, any type of offense, regardless of what it is, can often be a deciding factor for many people looking to hire or rent a place to live. And so there are divergent views about this type of legislation throughout the Capitol. I will tell you, it's not necessarily an easy lift. There are, we have a Republican supermajority, but within the Republican Party, there are many of us that, excuse me, I better put my phone on silent here. There are many of us that view criminal justice in divergent ways. I'm more of a libertarian-minded member of the General Assembly, and my philosophy is that the state has created a really vast labyrinth of laws and regulations through which it seeks to govern private behavior. And as a result of that, it's become very easy for many people to fall into the trap of the criminal justice system. And that was never meant to be a life sentence if you have run afoul of a various government ordinance or behavior governing statute. I understand that we have to have a certain level of law and order in our society, but once that punishment has been meted by the state, I think that it's time for those folks to be able to reintegrate in society. And the other point of view that I have is that our criminal justice system, especially because of the recidivism, has become extremely costly to the taxpayer. And I'm sure you all have seen the statistics that our country incarcerates more people than virtually anywhere else in the world. In fact, I think if you add up the rest of the world's prison population, it somewhat rivals our prison population in this country. And that certainly is an expensive proposition for the state. And so if you are a small government conservative like myself, you don't necessarily want to see a vastly expanding prison system. And so there's certainly many that share my perspective on that point of view. There are also members of the Republican Party that are consider themselves like the tough on crime style of conservative, lock them up and throw away the key. And that's a philosophy that predominates, and they're not necessarily as interested in these type of expungement style proceedings. And the other political dynamic is that those expensive prisons that I referenced earlier become job opportunities in very many parts of rural Missouri. And so you have very many rural communities that are, the prison may be the main employer in town. And so anything that shakes up that system, they aren't necessarily as excited to see. I will say, while we normally have enjoyed pretty broad support among folks in the Democratic Party on these type of issues, there are also a number of objections that tend to be raised by court clerks and other parts of the bureaucracy that many on the left are sympathetic to, and those type of concerns, logistical in nature, have often slowed down progress on this type of issue as well. And so it is a complicated and thorny political issue and policy issue, and it's going to take a really long time to wade through it. While I'm hopeful that we can get it done this year, I found this is the first year where I filed this. I found it usually takes 2 or 3 years to get a big complicated bill like this done. But I am heartened by the fact that we will have a hearing in the Judiciary Committee next week. And after that, the process is the committee will get to mark it up and change it the way they want, and then they'll vote on it. They'll send it to another committee that gets to do an up or down vote on it, and then it will come to the whole House floor for consideration. And at the same time, my colleague Curtis Trent from Springfield has filed identical legislation in the Senate. And his bill just got referred to the Senate Judiciary Committee, so it's now eligible for a hearing over there as well. And it has to go through a similar process. And then ultimately, both chambers have to pass the bill in the same form in order for it to go to the governor's desk. But our legislative strategy, briefly, is that I want to get a hearing and a favorable vote over here on the House side, and we're going to hope that Senator Trent gets a hearing and a favorable vote over on the Senate side. And once you have that hearing and vote, it's much easier to amend the legislation onto other criminal justice bills that are moving and perhaps farther down the process, because you can say, we had the hearing, everybody liked it, it's a well-vetted piece of legislation, and so you shouldn't worry about me adding it on to your legislation. And so I think that's where we're at for the next several weeks of session. I will note that we've received a huge amount of response from various grassroots groups on this particular issue. I was talking with some of our sponsors for this before we came on the live Zoom, and it seems like just about every week I talk to a different group of people that have come to the Capitol to advocate in favor of clean slate. And the support has been really diverse in its nature. We have groups of former offenders that have come to advocate and tell their personal stories of how the bill would help them. We've had many members of the business community come forward and say that this type of legislation is really important in order to reduce crime and increase economic activity in our community. We've had conservative groups like Americans for Prosperity, a big conservative national grassroots activist group that have come forward and advocated to legislatures for this style of legislation. And so it's really across the board. A lot of people think that this is a great idea, and I think that bodes well for its path through the legislative process. But it's not going to be easy. We're going to have to work through a lot of political issues and the technical logistical issues that arise with this type of legislation. You're all probably familiar with Amendment 3 that passed on the ballot last year to legalize the recreational use of marijuana. And within Amendment 3, there was actually an automatic expungement provision that dealt with marijuana-related offenses. And unfortunately, because that was done through a ballot proposition. It wasn't really written with a whole lot of input from various interests across the state. And so that automatic expungement process has been very difficult to implement through the judiciary. And it's been a source of frustration for many of the court clerks and judges who have come to the legislature and informed us that they believe that while it may be in the Constitution, it's technically unworkable the way that it was structured. And so unfortunately, we started our automatic expungement conversation with a strong bias from our judiciary against a system of automatic expungements because they had a really bad experience implementing Amendment 3. And so we're going to have to work through a lot of the court clerks' concerns, because ultimately we want this to be very easy for our judiciary to do. We don't want it to be a huge burden and strain on the judicial system. Our goal here is to expedite and automate processes. It's not to make things more complicated for the very hardworking clerks and judges who are trying to move through heavy dockets and dispense justice across the state. So that has been a sticking point, but I'm hopeful, however, through the legislative process where we can bring everybody together in hearing rooms and have a forum for conversation and collaboration over the different sticking points, that we can develop a product that ultimately everyone will be really satisfied with and will be easy to implement. And so I think at this point, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Jeff Smith here. I will note for the audience, so Jeff Smith was, while being a good friend of mine, I met him first when he was a professor at Washington University, which I attended as an undergraduate. Unfortunately, I never got to take a class with Professor Smith, but I have very much in the meantime enjoyed working with him on various issues of criminal justice. And I look forward to hearing what he has to say about the clean slate process.
Well, thanks very much for that, the great introduction, Phil. I appreciate it. Yeah, sadly, I wasn't able to have Phil as a student, and you can see the results of that. He missed the liberal indoctrination that I did with all my students. So maybe you can get your PhD at some point, and I can advise you on that. We can bring you around to the Democratic side. But anyway, Phil has been a tremendous legislative partner for me on an array of issues and for the whole criminal justice reform world. And I think the reason he's so effective at it is that he approaches it from kind of the first principles of his libertarian conservatism. He doesn't go in like leading, saying like, let's talk about criminal justice reform. He says, let's talk about freedom. He says, let's talk about economic opportunity for everyone. He says, let's talk about economic growth, for businesses that need workers. He says, let's talk about just efficiency in government and not forcing people to jump through all kinds of hoops that they can't afford to or don't have time or the resources or wherewithal to get through. Why force them to do that if they're trying to work? And he sees that the criminal justice system, if you're a libertarian conservative and you don't like big government that's big and bloated and wasteful and inefficient, there really aren't many better examples of that than the criminal justice system. And he does a fantastic job of articulating the conservative rationale for a lot of these reforms that can really make people's lives better. So I'm very grateful to him for that. So let me talk just for a couple minutes about the big picture here of why something like Clean Slate is important. And then Phil did a fantastic job of covering, the actual bill. And so then I'm going to just maybe respond to a couple of the questions in the chat, if I can, before we open it up for others to participate. So why is this important more broadly? Big picture, America, we do prison a lot differently than almost every other industrialized democracy. And yes, I will talk about how to be effective as advocates, Susan. Thank you for that question in the chat. So we do prison a lot differently than most other countries, industrialized democracies in the world. When you go into prison in Denmark, when you go into prison in Norway, a lot of other countries, particularly in Europe, you go into prison and you bring a suitcase with your luggage, with your clothes, and you go in and you have a room, and there aren't bars. It's a secure facility, but there aren't bars. And one of the first things you do is meet with a vocational counselor who talks to you about your work history, talks to you about your personality type, talks to you about your career goals, talks to you about any, behavioral health challenges that you have and how they can be addressed while you're incarcerated. And they get you into both behavioral health care and vocational training that will help you begin the process of turning your life around and creating goals for your release and what you can do post-release. Conversely, the first thing you do when you go into most American correctional facilities is you get a strip search. And you're stripped down, you're stripped of your name and you're given a number, you're stripped of your clothes, you're given a uniform, and every day thereafter, many days, you're stripped of your dignity in a lot of small ways. And it really beats people down and re-traumatizes the population, most of whom were already deeply traumatized in their childhood, which led to the issues that caused their incarceration. And so people in prison, and of course, as many of you know, I'm speaking from personal experience here, develop deep psychological scars and a pattern of defense mechanisms that don't oftentimes translate well to the work world. And so it is great that we're doing some of these legal changes, but and they're very important. And we need to use them as, I think, a jumping off point for a broader conversation about systemic changes in the way that we, operate our criminal justice system, so that people who come out are not even more damaged than they were when they went in. Because right now, about 625,000 people come out of prison every day in this country. Every year in this country. Just in the St. Louis region, about 5,000 people come back from prison every year. And they're coming to the same communities, knocking on the same doors in the same neighborhoods where they once have already failed before, except now they've got the added stigma of a prison record and all of the collateral consequences that entails. Thousands of laws and regulations relating to voting, relating to occupational licensing and employment, relating to housing, so many other realms that make it more difficult for them to be successful. Even though they're coming home, usually broke, often with no stable housing, often with little or no family support. When I was incarcerated, I helped a lot of guys write resumes, put resumes together. And the vast majority of people did not have a high school degree and did not have a gainfully employed person who they could list as a reference for them. So thinking about how many obstacles already exist for this population, it is absolutely nonsensical for the state to layer more obstacles on, which is why this bill is so important, to begin to, chipping away at some of the obstacles that already exist. The fact that 90% of employers run background checks, 85% of landlords perform background checks. And it's really hard to hold a stable job if you don't have a stable place to go home to. So these are housing and jobs, or housing and employment are inextricably intertwined. I work on some other stuff, and I just want to put a quick plug in for a program called the Transformative Workforce Academy out of St. Louis University. We've worked over the last 3 years to identify 130 employers in the region that will be second chance employers that will hire people with felony convictions. But trust me when I tell you, that 130, that's the numerator. The denominator is closer to 500 who we've approached over the years, many of whom have said this isn't for them. right? And so this is a huge problem of companies that look at someone with that record and say, we don't want to, this is too much for us. We don't think we can get over that. And so that's why there's such a huge need for legislation like this, because so many companies still will use one indicator that typically represents often the worst mistake or the worst moment of someone's life. And then they determine the future of that person's life, whether they'll give them an opportunity just based on that one moment. I can tell you, I've been obviously incredibly blessed to be able to come out of my experience and have employment. But even for someone like me who had advantages that 99.9% of people will never have when they leave the criminal justice system, having 300 people who wrote letters to the court on my behalf when I pled guilty, having a family that was angry at me but forgave me and was there for me, having some savings, not a ton, but enough to get back on my feet, having a house to go home to, having a PhD, being white. There's so many advantages I had that most people don't have, and it was hard for me to find a job when I came home. And in my first job interview at a small nonprofit, the vice chair of the board asked me at the end of the interview, she said, "You've got everything we're looking for in this position. Our only question for you is, why shouldn't we hire someone else and then maybe hire you in a year or so once the aroma has started to wear off?" If that's the kind of question that someone with the privileges and advantages that I had gets, imagine what it's like for most people who leave our system. So we're so grateful for people like Phil and people like Senator Curtis Trent that sponsored this bill in the Senate for stepping up to ease those obstacles, to begin chipping away at all the impediments for people. Speaking a little, let me address a couple of these questions that people have raised. I believe my good friend Chantel Fisher, who is the executive director of Soul Fisher Ministries, which does fantastic work for families that are impacted by the criminal justice system, asked, who are the other co-sponsors, and why are there no co-sponsors of color? I think it's a good question. Always a good thing to have co-sponsors, but we do live in the real world, and Phil's a good friend, and so I can speak candidly about this. You don't want to introduce a bill that's got 48 Democratic co-sponsors and 1 Republican co-sponsor, because we live in a supermajority Republican state with supermajority Republican in both chambers. And so I'm sure Phil hasn't declined any, but you do have to be a little careful. And I think he's been smart so far to have a balance, have, some Democratic support, have some Republican support, especially on a politically sensitive issue like this. It probably wouldn't be a good thing if all of a sudden next week there were, 40 new Democratic co-sponsors and no Republican ones. So adding those thoughtfully in the process, a Democrat or Republican, is probably a judicious, approach given the political realities of Missouri. And I think, Phil is really savvy about those kinds of considerations. Someone asked, Chantal asked, is it more likely to go through since there's already, so much momentum that has been built around expungement? And I think the answer to that is yes, it's more likely to go through than it would have been a decade ago when there wasn't grassroots momentum around this. But we should never forget the broader context, which is that there's something like 4,000 bills that get filed every year. And outside of the mandatory budget bills, like 50 of them will become law. So it's always a long shot. And the clock moves quickly, and the clock, it's all over on May 12th or whatever the day is this year. And so, you got to move fast. And so the activism that Phil referenced with, grassroots groups, talking to their legislators, coming up to the Capitol, making phone calls, that is really helpful. And again, speaking candidly, it's more helpful if the people that you can contact are Republicans, because they are, in charge. And Chantel, you asked, are there no members of the legislature, people of color who are Republicans? There is a new Black Republican legislator from St. Charles County, Justin, what's his last name?
Justin Hicks, and
Okay.
I should mention, Jeff, that Justin has also filed an expungement bill. It is not clean slate, but it is very similar in
Well,
nature to clean slate.
no,
And
I know him very well, and he's definitely not a proponent of second chances.
well, and so I will say that Justin has suggested his favorability to my legislation as well, and I think we're looking forward to working with him through the process.
So, I mean, this bill might be a great opportunity for, outreach to him to say, hey, I noticed that you filed a bill that has some similarities to this and appreciate you, coming around a little bit on this, or, I don't know what your past experience or interaction was with him, Chantel, but, he would be a great person to support this. So, I would say in response to Susan Glassman's question, good to see you, Susan, in response to your question, that the best, most effective advocacy, oh, that's a shame, Chantel, appreciate you hearing that, letting me know that, but contact your own legislator, absolutely, your own representative and your own senator, and ask them to support this. You've always got the most impact with your own legislator because you're their constituent. So contact your own legislator. Outside of that, the members of the Judiciary Committee, they're the ones who will hear this first. The most important cue to the House floor, the 163 people on the floor, are the 15-ish members of the Judiciary Committee. If they vote 8-7 to pass that out, that makes a totally different statement than if they vote 15-0. I don't know exactly how many members of Judiciary there are, but a unanimous vote out of committee is a really important signal to the floor. So if you either have a contact or know someone who knows someone on the Judiciary Committee of either chamber, I would say that would be after you've contacted your own legislators, that would be the next group of people that I would strongly suggest that you reach out to. And then finally, contacting leadership of both chambers. There's the Speaker of the House and there's the Majority Floor Leader. And the Speaker of the House has to put any bill that comes out of a House committee on the calendar. If it doesn't get on that floor calendar, then the House Majority Leader can't pull it off that calendar. So those members are Dean Plocher and John Patterson. So if they get hundreds of emails from around the state saying, we really want you, once the bill gets out of committee, we really hope that you will push that forward and hear it on the floor, it would be great to have them see that there is a real grassroots outpouring of support for this legislation, not just from people who are directly impacted, who are formerly incarcerated, but that there's a constituency to help this population reintegrate into our economic fabric of people who aren't necessarily justice involved themselves, but who understand that the success and the successful reassimilation of this population into our economic fabric is critical to the economic growth of our region and the public safety of our region, because there's no better indicator of whether or not someone who gets out of prison will recidivate than if they have a full-time job 6 months after they get out. So approaching them with those facts in mind, I think would be helpful. Sorry that I talked so long, but Mary, or Karen, I'll take it back to you guys, or Ann, to let us know what's next.
Thanks, Jeff. You did not talk so long. All was really great. This is wonderful. And I think you were monitoring the chat. So if you could ask other questions, that would be awesome.
Okay, great. Yes. And Jeff, thank you so much for answering so many of the questions that were in the chat. That was very helpful. And Mary Schumann just sent a note to Chantel that she will send a list of the members. Chantel asked, can we get a list of the members to contact? And so that will be coming. All right, so we had some other questions. One was, I think, a question to Phil, but I'm not, or to Representative Christofanelli, but it was from Nancy Page, asking who cannot be expunged in order to kind of prepare to answer questions from the opposition.
Yeah, I would have to go through and look at the existing expungement statute, but generally speaking, there are like serious violent felonies and sexual offenses are not expungible under the expungement statute. And so the expungement statute, as I recall, covers almost all misdemeanors and most non-violent felonies.
Okay. Great. All right. And then Mary Schumann did have a question about, I think it's for you, Professor, is Representative Hicks on the Judiciary Committee? Or it might be for you, Representative.
I believe he is. I'd have to double check, but I believe that he is.
I'm checking right now. I think he is too.
Mary, could you say a little bit about why you asked that question?
Which question?
Is Representative Hicks on the Judiciary Committee?
We're just talking about, I think it was Chantel was asking about a person of color.
Yeah, he's on Judiciary.
Yeah, okay.
All right,
That
good.
was it. I had a different question further down though.
Okay, go ahead and ask that.
For Representative Christofanelli.
Okay. All right. Mary, go ahead and ask that question.
Okay, so the number of crime-free years that are required for expungement are longer in this bill than the current Missouri statute specifies. What was the reasoning for this?
Well, I think the reasoning generally is that there was a desire to not necessarily eliminate the existing expungement proceeding. Like if someone, as soon as they became eligible, wanted to go through the legal processes to expunge their record earlier, that they would have the ability to do that, but that we would also allow the courts to process everything automatically on a timeline that would be workable for them. And I think that's the balance that was struck with those proposed year lengths. But keep in mind, with any of the details of this bill, I've passed many bills in my 7 years now of being a legislator, and very rarely when it comes down to the details do the final versions look like exactly like what I initially file. And so all the parts of the legislation are negotiable through the legislative process. And if there's things we like or things we don't like, when we get to the hearing stage, people can voice those concerns and we can try to find a path forward that works for everybody.
Great. I'd like to point out that there is now a link in the chat for the Judiciary Committee members. So those of you who wanted to know who else to contact, there's a link there.
And you all said the judiciary, that's the first step of getting it through. Okay, thank you.
Okay, good. Now, there was another question from you, Chantel, about is it beyond the state of Missouri? Is there any connection to the databases beyond the state of Missouri in terms of expungement? And so maybe you could explain a little bit. I know you had some more information about what this question, where this question is coming from for you.
So I think that that she's referencing one of the troubles with legislation of this type. There are private companies that as soon as it hits CaseNet, they go through and they scrape all the data off of CaseNet and they put that in their private database, which then they sell to background check companies, or they are background check companies. And thus, even if we were to pull the record off of CaseNet, it would still essentially be out there and accessible to whoever wanted to pay to buy it. I think, and I'd have to look because we've debated this one back and forth, and it's certainly a big point of contention in the legislation itself. I think as my bill stands right now, we ask those companies to also expunge their records on a regular basis. But I will tell you, having worked on issues similar to this in the past, those companies tend to be well represented in the Capitol, and they tend to fight anything that would disrupt their business model of selling this type of information. And so often, well, these measures end up being some level of compromise with organizations such as that, and how it will end up in the final product, I think, is to be determined.
I'm thinking, I'm talking more about like the FBI database. So like, even though I've gotten Missouri expungements, the convictions still show up when I have to go and do a fingerprint, a federal background check.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure of the answer to that. I would say that even if we wanted to expunge a record off of an FBI database, I doubt we would have the legal authority to do so. And so my initial off the cuff guess is that those would still remain, but it's something that I would have to look into deeper to know for sure.
Because I mean, that's the main one that people do. So if it's still there, like what's the true benefit to having the expungement outside of Missouri?
One of the things that I will point out is that right now, I've got probably 12 CaseNet windows open on my screen. Every single person can very easily go to Missouri CaseNet, and it's almost as simple as a Google search, and put people's names in the Google search, and then get access to all manner of documents that may or may not be designed for public use. And so there is certainly a level of privacy that will come with this bill, even if it does not manage to expunge every single record that may exist out there. And like I said, with the federal issue, this is the first time that I've had that question. I'd have to look into it to know for sure.
Okay. I'm not sure, Mary, that we got to this question from you. The number of crime-free years required for expungement are no longer in this bill. Did we ask that already?
Yeah, I think I addressed.
All right, we did. Okay, good. All right. Now, these are all of the questions in the chat for the Zoom call. We also have a number of people who are listening to this presentation through live stream, and I don't know if there are any questions available from them. Laura, could you let us know if there are?
There are not.
Okay. All right. Then let's see. Are there any other questions? Or any other points you'd like to make, presenters? You've done a great job of answering. There are a lot of questions here, and you did a great job of answering them.
Yes, very much so. And definitely want to thank you both, Jeff and Phil, for your time and also for your dedication to these topics. We also want to thank our co-sponsor, JCRC, and everyone who has attended this. We're all more educated, and now we can take that into advocacy. We have your email addresses since you registered, and we're going to be sending you an email with a sample letter and also a link that you could find your legislators so that you can write to your legislators in support of HB 352. Jeff gave you some things right to the Judiciary Committee as well. So this will help you. We would really, really love your advocacy for Clean Slate. And with that,
I have one more thing. I would also like to add that there's another link in the chat that I've added both in the beginning and just now from Empower Missouri. about information about Monday's hearing so that you can also get a little more information there. So be watching for information, further information from us.
It's very exciting. And I want to put a plug in for Women's Voices Raised membership. We, of course, would love everyone to be a member. So again, it's on our website, womensvoicesraised.org. You can become a member. So thanks everyone for your time and attention.
If the only last thing I'll say, if I can just say one more final thing super quick,
Sure.
is just that, right now, according to Missouri statute, people who are on probation and parole cannot vote. And, they're the most directly impacted by this. They certainly aren't out there making big political donations either. So there's not that much of a sort of natural constituency for this. And so it's really, I'm really just, grateful when legislators say, here's an issue that, the people, there's not, most of the people who would benefit can't even vote, period, let alone, vote for me or live in my district, and are still out here fighting for those people whose voices are not heard. So let's let those folks know, who are out there carrying the torch on this, how much we appreciate their efforts.
Great.
Great. Thank you all so much.
You're
and
welcome.
have a great rest of your day.